I'm very excited, very happy, very moved, very everything tonight to be up here, to be singled out from among all these very talented people. I sometimes come to the Academy Awards and watch them year after year, and I get caught up in the spectacle of it, in the event, in the very complex type of entertainment.
This video explores the career of Robert Duvall and how he used silence to break down the fake walls of Hollywood stardom. By turning the ink of a script into raw human behavior, he built a legacy that serves as the bedrock of modern American film. While most actors fight to be the loudest in the room, Duvall stayed in the shadows to construct the foundation of modern realism. A man who anchored the greatest blockbusters of the 1970s eventually spent 12 years trying to fund his own creative vision. We're looking at a performer who refused to be a star so he could remain an actor. In the winter of 1955, the true origin of modern American performance began in a drafty, cold room in Manhattan. This location functioned as a geographical anomaly where the fake theatricality of the past vanished to reveal a gritty truth. Robert Duvall arrived at the neighborhood Playhouse School of the Theater as a veteran using the GI Bill, and he carried the weight of a man who had seen the world outside of a stage. Manhattan in the 50s offered a sensory furnace of steam rising from asphalt and the rhythmic clatter of the subway. Inside the school, the atmosphere grew thick with intensity because of the revolutionary teachings of Sanford Meisner. Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman shared living quarters with Duvall, creating a small group that eventually redefined the American screen while they scrounged for roles. Sorting mail in the post office or driving a truck paid for a cramped room he shared with Hoffman, but these men were not stars in training. They were laborers of the craft. Cromwell's drugstore on 50th and 6th Avenue hosted their weekly meetings, where the air smelled of percolated coffee and the desperate ambition of young men. They obsessed over Marlon Brando during these sessions. Duvall once told students that if they mentioned Brando's name once, they mentioned it 25 times because he represented the only way to stay real in a fake industry. Alice Lewison Crowley wrote in her book, The Neighborhood Playhouse, Leads from a Theater Scrapbook, that the school focused on ensemble work rather than the old star system. Founded to reject traditional theatrical norms, the curriculum pushed for an intense realism that felt dangerous at the time. Sanford Meisner moved acting away from the internal methods of Lee Strasberg and toward a reactive reality of doing. The result was a generation of weathered actors who possessed a maturity that traditional leads lacked. These men did not seek approval, and the result was a systemic shift that demanded actors who could breathe as characters rather than pose as idols. Real change arrived for Duvall when the old studio system collapsed during the late 1960s. This shift happened because the Hollywood antitrust law of 1948 eroded studio power, and that's when the dismissal of the Hays Code in 1968 finally removed moral constraints. A new generation of filmmakers like Francis Ford Coppola emerged in this vacuum, and they searched for a level of honesty that the previous regime suppressed. Robert Duvall became the anchor for this entire transition. $36,000 was the specific sum Duvall earned for his work as Tom Hagen in The Godfather, which was a figure that actually surpassed Al Pacino's initial pay. This data point shows the industry was shifting toward reliable craftsmanship over unproven star power. Movies required a guarantor of reality, and Duvall provided the soul that made the criminal organization feel believable to audiences. He moved from the silence of 1138 to the media satire of Network in just a few years. Casting calls for the most ambitious projects of the decade always included his name. While Al Pacino and James Caan occupied the flashy roles, Duvall sat in the center as the silent architecture of the story. Characters like the outsider conciliere required a mastery of buried pain and active observation. By the end of the 1970s, he had secured 3 Oscar nominations, and this proved that his supporting roles contributed as much as any lead. Gritty realism became the new currency, and Duvall remained the most valuable player in that market. Sanford Meisner wrote in his book, Sanford Meisner on Acting, that a performer should never simulate an emotion. The goal is to live truthfully under imaginary circumstances, and this theory became the foundation of Duvall's entire creative life. Creating a reality of doing is much harder than it sounds. But here's the thing, Duvall used this method to strip away the vanity that usually ruins a performance. Practice sessions for Meisner students often focus on the repetition exercise. Two actors sit across from each other and repeat phrases like, "You're wearing a blue shirt," to move their focus away from their own thoughts. This forces a person to act before they think, which meant they didn't have time to edit or withhold a truthful response. Duvall credits this specific training with sculpting the authenticity seen in his roles, from Boo Radley to the great Santini. Forcing a result is the death of good acting. Listening sits at the bedrock of the craft, but most actors simply wait for their cue to speak. Duvall's work showcases the power of active listening, where every response is a spontaneous reaction to what is happening right now. He describes the process as studying the lines and then simply talking and listening when the director calls action. To him, the task is to move from ink to behavior by letting the imagination take over. Achieving household name status while remaining unrecognizable is a rare feat in a business that loves fixed personas. This is the paradox of Duvall's career, and he often occupied a space just a step removed from the center of the action. Global power structures in film reward the mirage of celebrity, but Duvall chose to be a transformational character actor instead.
He destroyed his own image to build something new for every single movie. Business executives in Hollywood rely on the star system to guarantee a return on their money. Duvall is a statistical anomaly because his films grossed billions, while the star credit usually went to people like Pacino or De Niro. In Apocalypse Now, his performance as Bill Kilgore lasted only 10 minutes, yet it became one of the most iconic moments in war cinema history. He provided the authority that allowed the main stars to shine, which meant he acted as the foundation the studio took for granted. Duvall refused to accept a secondary status when The Godfather Part 3 went into production. The studio offered him $1 million, but Al Pacino was set to earn $5 million for the same movie. This financial gap revealed a deep bias, where the consigliere is viewed as less valuable than The Godfather. Rather than accept a diminished value for his craft, the actor walked away and let his character be written out entirely. His choices defined him as a man who valued the truth of the role over the ego of the hierarchy. Winning a 12-year battle against the studio machine allowed Duvall to finally produce The Apostle in 1997. This wasn't a calculated career move. The problem was that Hollywood had a habit of making fun of the American South. Executives told him the script had too much dialogue and too much talk about Jesus, and they claimed it wasn't a commercial venture. He saw The American Preacher as a true art form and refused to let the industry turn the character into a cartoon. Southern religion is often patronized by filmmakers who fear complex spiritual subjects. Duvall wanted to show a preacher who was a true believer, but also a violent and deeply flawed human being. Radioactivity surrounded the project for years because studio heads prefer canned and prefab story arcs. Since nobody would give him the money, he acted as his own financier and put up $5 million from his own bank account. Butcher's Run Films handled the production because Duvall decided he didn't need anyone's permission to tell his story. His accountant actually gave the final green light after checking the books to ensure he could afford the risk. Filming on location in Louisiana meant he could use non-actors from local congregations to capture the spontaneity of a real church service. The result was a $21 million worldwide gross and an Oscar nomination, which proved the studios were completely wrong about the audience's appetite for truth. Investigating a character's root cause is what Duvall calls moving from ink to behavior. He does not settle for surface-level cues, and he views research as the catalyst for any performance that actually matters. This commitment to digging into the subject matter turns acting into a form of organized behavior. He doesn't just play a part, he conducts a systemic immersion into a different life. Max Sledge and Tender Mercies required a specific type of preparation that most actors would find exhausting. Driving 600 miles across Texas, Duvall recorded local accents and played in country bands to find the right cadence for the role. He searched for the silence that a damaged man uses as a weapon. When he played Colonel Kilgore in Apocalypse Now, he threw out the original script because he thought the character was a joke. Researching with a real Vietnam helicopter pilot allowed him to ground the military authority in reality. Truth is the ultimate goal, and Duvall views the actor as an instrument for reaching that truth. He praises directors like Francis Ford Coppola because they wait to see what the actor brings to the table. Learning to dance for Assassination Tango or studying a black preacher in Virginia are just parts of his constant calibration against the real world. He digs through the facade of the script until he finds the fundamental life beneath it. Engagement with the American West offered Duvall a chance to challenge the way folklore is told on screen. 1989 was the year he took the role of Gus McCrae in Lonesome Dove, and he still considers it the most important Western ever made. He turned the old archetype of the Texas Ranger into a gentleman who values a sip of good whiskey over a grand narrative of heroism. Wisdom in the story is found in the everyday reality of living, rather than the drama of dying. Spontaneity replaced the stiff and stilted style of older Western movies once Duvall arrived on set. He hated rude behavior in men and built his character around a strict code of personal integrity. The frontier felt unpredictable because he brought a reactive energy to the trail that made the audience feel the dirt and the heat. By focusing on the organized behavior of a man who had seen everything, he created a version of the West that felt authentically American. Folklore and folk religion were themes he returned to again and again because they felt connected to the soil of the country. Reclaiming the Western genre was a systemic success that proved personal stories could still draw a massive audience. He refused to pose on a horse or act like a typical movie star. Instead, he simply talked and listened to the spirit of the frontier until the character became a national anchor. Gus McCrae remains his definitive legacy, showing that a character actor can command the center of the story without ever raising his voice. Spiritual connections often defined the work between Duvall and screenwriter Horton Foote. Foote was the architect of the actor's Southern voice, and their bond began way back in 1962 with To Kill a Mockingbird. During the 2010 filming of Get Low, the production took a strange turn when Foote passed away exactly as they were filming a funeral service. Duvall felt as though his old friend was witnessing the completion of a journey that had come full circle. Foote's death hit the set with a spooky intensity, but the work continued as a tribute to their shared history. Living on his own terms meant that Duvall never retired into a life of luxury or ease. Everything the man built resulted in a net worth of $70 million by 2025, but he still prefers to take small roles in independent films. He believes these smaller projects carry the mantle of the character-driven stories from the 70s. Financial stewardship and disciplined choices allowed him to outlast the very system that tried to ignore him. What nobody expected was for the mail clerk from 1955 to become the elder statesman of American cinema. Signal sniffing for truth is still his primary job, and he brings a stern look and a serene presence to every frame. He continues to live truthfully under imaginary circumstances because he knows that acting is just life with the lights on. The answer to his career doesn't sit in a trophy case. It lives in the silence of the moments between action and cut.